Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we're going deep on something I think a lot of people are curious about.
Yeah.
It's AI sentiment analysis in election campaigns, which, sounds very like buzzwordy, but it's actually super fascinating.
Yeah.
Our listeners sent in some really interesting articles and research on this.
Yeah, it's a lot of good stuff to unpack.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff to unpack.
Mm.
So basically our goal in this deep dive is to figure out what this tech actually is,
Right.
how campaigns are actually using it, because it seems like it's becoming really influential.
Incredibly influential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also some of the ethical questions that come up.
Right, which are many.
Which are many, yes.
Yeah.
And then some potential solutions like maybe UX design can help with that.
Absolutely.
So really aiming for real understanding here.
Yeah, I think that's a great goal.
Okay, so let's start with the basics.
Sure.
AI sentiment analysis. For anyone who's not I don't know, a data scientist.
Right.
What is it?
So in essence, AI sentiment analysis is a type of technology
Okay.
that uses natural language processing. So that's basically how computers make sense of human language.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
And then combines that with machine learning to basically figure out the emotional tone behind a piece of text.
Okay.
So think of it this way. You have a voter, and they're online, and they're frustrated.
Okay.
They post something like, "This candidate's recent statement on healthcare just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I'm completely disappointed."
Okay.
Right. So the AI can analyze those words
Yeah.
and pinpoint that negative sentiment, in this case, disappointment.
Okay.
So it's able to kind of go beyond just the words themselves.
So it's not just looking for keywords like disappointed.
Right, exactly. It's looking at the whole context,
It's like
the
understanding
meaning and the emotion behind the
your
word.
feelings. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's like a really powerful way for campaigns to kind of gauge, get a sense of what the public is feeling.
Absolutely.
But on a scale that would be impossible for humans to do.
Yeah, imagine trying to read millions of tweets and posts.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's just not feasible.
So how are campaigns actually using this, strategically?
So campaigns are using it to continuously understand how voters are reacting to things.
Okay.
So by analyzing comments on social media or responses to online polls, even like what people are saying in forums, they can figure out,
Okay.
is the overall sentiment about a candidate positive, negative?
We're neutral.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this lets them change their strategies really quickly.
Okay, so give me an example.
Sure. So let's say a candidate gives a speech,
Okay.
and online, everyone hates it.
Oh, okay.
The reaction is overwhelmingly negative.
Uh-huh.
The campaign can then quickly adjust their talking points or the messaging, before the next event even happens.
So they can course correct really quickly based on this data.
Exactly. It gives them this real-time feedback.
Okay, that makes sense. It's almost like having a focus group that's constantly giving feedback.
Yeah, exactly. A focus group on steroids.
Right, exactly. I think some of the sources, mentioned historical examples of this.
Yeah, they did.
Is this a new thing or has this been around for a while?
Well, the idea of understanding voter sentiment has always been important in campaigns.
Right, of course.
But using AI to do it is relatively new.
Okay.
And a great example is the 2012 Obama campaign.
Uh-huh.
They used social media sentiment analysis
Okay.
to gauge how people were reacting to their policies
Okay.
and their campaign messages.
So they could see, okay, this policy is resonating, this one isn't.
Exactly. And even more granular than that,
Okay.
they could see which aspects of a policy people liked or disliked.
Oh, wow.
So they could double down on the popular parts
Uh-huh.
and then maybe reframe or downplay the less popular stuff.
So it gave them a really deep understanding of what was working and what wasn't.
Exactly.
So really, this is just a much, much more powerful way of doing something that campaigns have always tried to do.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, I think some of the sources also mentioned some other campaigns that were using this.
Right. There are a few other notable examples.
Yeah.
And one that was mentioned quite a bit was Cambridge Analytica.
Right. I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, they were involved in both the Brexit referendum and the Trump campaign in 2016.
Okay.
And their aim was to use sentiment analysis to identify very specific groups of voters
Okay.
based on their emotional states.
Okay. So not just demographics, but how they're feeling.
Exactly. So things like fear, hope, anger, those kinds of emotions.
Okay.
And then the idea was to deliver very tailored messages that would resonate with those specific emotions.
So instead of just sending the same message to everyone,
Right. It was about micro-targeting.
they were tailoring it based on people's feelings.
Exactly.
Okay, that's where the potential strategic advantage really comes in. Now, how does the AI actually do this? Like, practically?
Yeah. So it's actually pretty fascinating.
Okay.
You start with these massive data sets of text,
Okay.
like just huge amounts of text,
Uh-huh.
and they've already been tagged with corresponding emotional tones.
Okay, so like someone's gone through and said like, this text is happy, this text is angry, this text is sad.
Right, exactly. Like positive, negative, neutral,
Okay.
but also more specific emotions.
Okay.
Like joy, fear, anger, all of that.
Okay.
So the AI learns from this data.
Okay.
It's like training.
It's like training it to recognize patterns.
Exactly.
Okay.
And once it's trained, it can then process new text that's coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Like from social media, blogs, forums, all of that.
And it can figure out the emotional tone of that new text.
Exactly. And then what's really cool is it can create these things called sentiment maps.
Sentiment maps. Okay. What are those?
So it's not like a literal paper map.
Okay.
It's more like a visual representation of the sentiment data.
Okay, paint me a picture. Like, what would I see if I was looking at a sentiment map?
Okay, so imagine a dashboard.
Okay.
And on this dashboard, you might see a breakdown of the overall sentiment towards a candidate.
Okay.
So like, let's say 60% positive, 25% negative, 15% neutral.
Okay.
But then you can go deeper.
Okay.
You might see a geographical map where different regions are color-coded based on how they feel about a specific policy.
Okay.
So like one region might be deep red,
Uh-huh.
which means there's a lot of negative sentiment there
Okay.
towards a certain policy,
Okay.
while another region might be bright green, which means strong approval.
So you can really see geographically where the support or the opposition is.
Exactly. And then you could even break it down by demographics.
Okay.
So like age groups, genders, professions, all of that.
So you can really see like, okay, young women in this region feel this way about this issue.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's a very granular, very detailed understanding of public opinion.
Right. And it's dynamic. It's constantly updating as new data comes in.
Okay, so this is obviously incredibly valuable for campaigns.
Absolutely.
It's a game changer.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Okay. Now, thinking about how this is all applied, one thing that the sources touched on was user experience.
UX, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a crucial aspect.
So, like, I think for a lot of people, when they think about UX, they think about websites.
Right, or apps.
Yeah, like making them easy to use.
Right, making sure things are intuitive,
Yeah.
user-friendly.
But how does that relate to something like AI in elections?
So it's a good question because it's not immediately obvious.
Right.
But if you think about the core principles of UX, it's really about designing experiences that are thoughtful
Okay.
and respectful of the user.
Okay.
And in the context of AI sentiment analysis, that becomes really important.
Okay, so how can those UX principles be applied here?
So one big area is how campaigns communicate with voters about their data. So UX designers are great at making information clear and accessible.
Uh-huh.
So they can help campaigns explain to voters.
Okay.
Okay, here's how your publicly available data might be analyzed.
Okay.
And we're doing it for sentiment analysis
Okay.
in a way that's easy to understand.
Right, because I imagine like right now if you go to a campaign website and you look at the terms of service,
It's probably buried in legalese.
yeah, it's 1,000,000 pages long.
Nobody reads that.
Nobody reads that.
Right.
So UX can help make it more clear and upfront.
Exactly. So people actually understand what's happening with their data.
Okay, do you have an example, like a specific example?
Sure. So let's say a campaign has a mobile app
Okay.
for supporters, to like donate or volunteer.
Uh-huh.
A UX designer could build into that app a clear explanation about how it might analyze the user's public social media data
Okay.
to understand the overall sentiment
Okay.
towards the campaign or specific issues. And what's really important is they could design a way for users to see what data is being looked at
Okay.
and why.
Okay, so it's not just like we're using your data, it's like we're using your data to do this.
Exactly. It's about transparency.
Okay.
It's not necessarily about getting consent for every single data point, but it's about making the process more transparent.
Okay, so it's about making it less of a black box.
Exactly.
Okay, what other aspects of UX are relevant here?
Another important aspect is making sure that campaign communications are relevant and respectful.
Okay.
So UX design really emphasizes understanding user needs and preferences.
Uh-huh.
And if you apply that to AI sentiment analysis, campaigns can use those insights
Okay.
to tailor their messages
Okay.
in a way that's more aligned with what voters actually care about,
Okay.
instead of just bombarding them with irrelevant stuff.
Right. Because I imagine if you're getting a message that's completely irrelevant to you,
It's annoying.
it's annoying and it feels impersonal.
Exactly. It feels like spam.
Yeah. Exactly. And the goal here isn't manipulation.
Right.
It's about more effective communication
Okay.
by understanding what matters to different groups of voters.
Okay, so using the data to create a better experience for the voter.
Exactly.
Okay, and I think the sources mentioned some real-world examples
Yeah, they did.
that kind of illustrate these points.
Uh-huh.
So let's talk about some of those.
Okay.
So we talked about the Obama campaign earlier.
Right.
How does that fit in with UX?
So the Obama campaign, from a UX perspective, they were pretty good about transparency in their data usage,
Okay.
especially compared to later examples.
Right.
You know, sentiment analysis was still pretty new back then, but their focus was really on understanding voter reactions to inform their own strategy,
Okay.
rather than using it for manipulative micro-targeting,
Okay.
you know, without the user even knowing.
Okay.
So that aligns more with a user-centered approach.
Okay, so they were more transparent, more upfront about what they were doing. Yeah, they were trying to understand the voters, not just manipulate them.
Okay, and then we have examples where maybe those UX considerations weren't as central.
Right, and Cambridge Analytica is a prime example.
Yeah.
There was a huge disconnect there
Okay.
between the user and their awareness of what was happening with their data.
Okay.
There wasn't that clear communication about how the data was being collected, how it was being used.
Okay.
And then they used that data for very targeted messaging that a lot of people found intrusive or manipulative.
Right.
And that really contrasts with a user-centered approach.
Okay.
It shows what can go wrong when you don't think about the user experience.
Right. It's like they were treating people like data points instead of like human beings.
Exactly.
Okay, and then GDPR was also mentioned in some of the sources?
Yeah, the General Data Protection Regulation.
Yeah. How does that play into all of this?
So the GDPR is basically a law in the EU that sets a standard for data privacy.
Okay.
And it gives people more control over their personal data.
Okay.
And from a UX perspective, complying with GDPR means designing systems and interfaces
Okay.
that let users easily understand what data is being collected,
Okay.
why it's being collected, and how they can exercise their rights,
Okay.
like accessing their data, correcting it, or deleting it.
Okay, so it's all about giving people more control.
Exactly. And UX designers play a vital role in making sure that all of that is easy to understand and use.
Okay, so they're translating the legalese into something that's user-friendly.
Exactly.
Okay. So it seems like the big takeaway here is that while AI sentiment analysis is incredibly powerful, it's really important to think about the user experience.
Absolutely.
You know, being transparent, being relevant, respecting how voters understand all of this.
Right. It's not just about ethics.
Okay.
It's also about effectiveness in the long run.
Okay.
If you want to build trust with voters, you need to be upfront with them.
Okay.
You need to show them that you respect their privacy.
So it's actually a better strategy in the long run to be more ethical about it.
Exactly.
Okay, that's really interesting. So just to kind of recap what we've talked about.
Sure.
AI sentiment analysis is this very powerful tool
Yeah.
for campaigns to understand how voters are feeling and to tailor their strategies. But thinking about the user experience,
Yeah.
you know, focusing on transparency, relevance, and voter understanding
Right.
can help campaigns use this technology in a more thoughtful and maybe even more effective way.
Absolutely.
And the examples we've talked about really show that there's a whole spectrum of approaches here.
Yeah, and a range of outcomes.
Yeah.
Some good, some not so good.
Okay, so as we wrap up here,
Sure.
what's the big thought you want to leave us with?
So AI is obviously advancing very quickly.
Yeah.
And as it becomes more sophisticated, especially in understanding and responding to human emotions,
Okay.
it really makes us think about the bigger picture. So I think the big question is, you know, what are the long-term implications here
Okay.
for how campaigns connect with voters and for fostering meaningful engagement in the democratic process?
Okay, so it's about more than just the technology.
Right. It's about the future of democracy itself.
It's about how we communicate and engage with each other in a world where AI is becoming so powerful.
Exactly.
All right, well, that's a lot to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
My pleasure.
And thanks to our listeners for sending in such great source material.
Yes, thank you.
This was a really fascinating deep dive.
It was, yeah.
Until next time.
See you then.